Good morning and happy Sunday. Let's get going with our countdown as we start another Sunday with Weightless in mind, body, and spirit. So exciting. Well, good morning and happy Sunday, and welcome to another episode of Weightless in Mind, Body, and Spirit with yours truly, Dr. Carol Penn. You know me, doubly certified, board certified doc. My goodness, master movement meditation and mindset coach, two-time best-selling author, wife, mother, friend, sister. Yeah, you name it, all the wonderful and complex things that you are, we are, and here we are. Today, I'm super excited about the guest that we have waiting backstage. She is another one of our super friends. So I want everybody to get out your writing instruments, crayons, markers, pens, pencils, your journal, your notebook, your piece of paper, however you keep track, because you're going to want this information. You're going to learn something about what might be a new concept in medicine for you. You're going to learn something about how you could take the terrain of you, pay attention to that word terrain, and move yourself to the next level, new mindset, new idea, right? And so that brings me to why we call this show Weightless in Mind, Body, and Spirit. So yeah, you know, I'm board certified in obesity medicine. We talk about all the ways that in all this body systems that if we know how to be in balance with ourselves, including our ideal weight and ideal metabolism, wow, you know, we get healed. And we talk about the importance of healing in mind, body, and spirit. And we look at the science of it. And then we also look at the spirituality behind it. And we look at the meaning of what does it mean to feel weightless in mind, body, and spirit. So the feeling tone of your life has a wonderful and light quality to it. So important. We go on both sides. In today's show, my friend and my very special guest, Dr. Maya Sheetreat-Klein, is waiting backstage. I'm going to bring her on. First, I want to say hello to some of our guests that are tuning in this morning, and then we're going to bring Dr. Maya on, and she's going to talk about, well, first of all, she's a pediatric neurobiologist, right? No, she's a pediatric. Yeah, she's a pediatric neurologist. She's also a neurobiologist, an ethnobotanist. She's many, many, many things. I'm going to let her introduce herself and share her story, you know, how she got into medicine and what she's doing now. But we met, my goodness, quite a while ago up in Kripalu at a program called, I think it was Mind, Mood, and Food. And she was then talking about her book, The Dirt Cure, which is like a global bestseller. And from the pediatric point of view, what we need to be doing to optimize the health and wellness of our kids, starting with, rolling around out in the dirt and playing in the sunshine, and why that's so important. But I digress. So I want to say hello to a few folks, and then we're going to bring Dr. Maya on and meet her and learn about something called the Terrain Summit. So good morning and welcome, Victoria. Glad to see you here today. Yes, good morning, Dr. Lady in Red. Yes, red, first chakra this morning. We're talking about our roots. Good morning, Sharon, on this sunny day. I hope you all are ready to ask some powerful questions. Good morning, Dr. Kathy. Of course, Dr. Kathy, I believe that you and Dr. Maya have met before, but maybe not. So welcome, Center for Mind Body Medicine in the house. Good morning, Martha. Yeah. Oh, Sharon. I first met Dr. Meyer many years ago via Foodist Medicine with the Center for Mind Body Medicine. Bravo. So your fans follow you, Dr. Maya. Good morning, Dr. Dawn. Good morning, Linda. Good morning, DM. All right. So we've got quite a wonderful group gathered here. Let's bring Dr. Maya Chitri on, author of this amazing book, The Dirt Cure. If you don't have it, get it, download it on Audibles. It'll change your life. It'll change your life. Good morning, Dr. Maya. Yay. Welcome. Woo-hoo. We did it. So first of all, welcome to Weightless in Mind, Body, and Spirit. I am so excited about what you are bringing to us, what you're bringing to the world this week. But before we get into that, how does a little girl, are you originally from the Bronx?
I am actually from Alexandria, Virginia.
Oh, originally from, okay. Well, how does a little girl from Alexandria, Virginia become a pediatric neurologist?
Well, you might want to fix that question to say a pediatric neurologist who breaks all the rules and does herbalism and
Well, yes, we're going to get into that. So, seriously, who does herbalism, who does spirituality, I've been to her home, who's got chickens and eggs, little chickens running around in the yard and makes these beautiful natural, altars and sacred and spiritual places. How does that happen?
Well, I think one of my most prominent memories as a kid, I was an only child. So, and I grew up in this suburban area outside of Washington, D.C. And I just remember spending a lot of time next to this creek. It was like a runoff creek, actually, near my house. I used to just spend hours playing by this creek, making little potions, doing, I think, things that a lot of kids do. And that was like really my whole, I did that and I read books. Those were my big things besides the usual things that kids do. And I didn't have siblings. Ultimately you start to realize that doing all the, playing by the creek and making pretty little, things with nature and making your potions isn't what, you're going to get any accolades for. You're not going to get, people are not going to recognize anything about that. So eventually I actually wasn't that interested in school for a long time, not until I got to high school. And then I suddenly things clicked for me. I was interested in English. I was interested in science. And the reason I actually went to med school, I didn't know I was an English major in college. And I really wasn't totally sure I wanted to go to med school. I thought about it here and there, but it was when I saw the Bill Moyers special. For anyone who watched Bill Moyers, he did this special called Healing and the Mind, which came out when I was in college. And I watched this special and particularly was taken by this story of a young girl who had lupus and she couldn't take her meds because they were toxic to her kidneys. But she then, when she'd stop her meds, her lupus would flare. So she was in this kind of lose-lose situation. And her doctor said, well, you know what, we're going to give her castor oil every time she takes her meds. And then eventually they stopped giving her meds, gave her just castor oil, and her body responded as if she was getting her meds. And they said, this is called psychoneuroimmunology. And I thought, wow, that's what I want to do with my life. I'm interested in that thing. That's interesting. I'm going to go to med school. And I wrote my essay about it. And they let me into med school, even though I learned many years later over the course of all my training that psychoneuroimmunology is not something they teach in medical school or in residency, very much at least, certainly not when I was there. So throughout my training, I thought, well, I'm going to eventually learn that, but you know what med school is. I mean, it's, you're inculcated and it's a little bit, I hate to say brainwashing, but kind of, you're expected to take on this whole paradigm And it doesn't include things like psychoneuroimmunology for sure. And I also had 3 children over the course of my training. So it was really actually my son who reminded me of what I was here to do, what I had gone to med school to do many, many years into my training when I was in my neurology fellowship.
Wonderful, wonderful. And the story of your son and what happened with your son is it opens up your book, The Dirt Cure, and the things that you learned in that journey, which kind of leads to, wow, the Terrain Institute, and tomorrow, the launch of the week-long Terrain Summit. So could you, again, I love how we learn through stories. Could you take us into and through that and tell us, I bet people out here don't know what the Terrain Institute is and how, you've really put together a perspective that allows us, I believe, to advance, to evolve humanity through the thoughts, through your theories, through the way that you practice medicine.
Well, thank you for saying that. First of all, so I think many of us know that the people around us in our lives become our spiritual teachers. Whether we're having an easy time or a difficult time, there are always these spiritual lessons that we get to have. And, I think a lot of us recognize that our children can be our spiritual teachers very often. And for me, all 3 of my children are, but especially my youngest son, who I call my muse, because he's led me through exactly where I've needed to be professionally through things that he needed in his, as he's had health challenges. So, and he had kind of a couple of different experiences. The first one is what led me to write The Dirt Cure, which, around a year of age, he developed what seemed like asthma, and he was having breathing issues. He was having kind of a developmental almost regression. He had been an early talker. He stopped gaining new words. He was falling. He wasn't catching himself, so he was hitting his face on the ground, and he'd always have like a bruised forehead and nose. I was in my pediatric neurology fellowship. I was studying adult and pediatric neurology at that time. So it was kind of a terrifying time, watching this happen in real time with my own child. And I went to different doctors. I went to the best, quote unquote, pediatric allergist in maybe the world, but one of the most known. And he kind of poo-pooed me, basically, sent me home. Said, oh, no, I don't think this is a food allergy. And eventually I found somebody an allergist who found a skin test, and his whole arm blew up from soy. And it turned out he was allergic to soy. And it also turned out that he was drinking soy milk every day because he had been allergic to regular dairy. And I thought soy was better for him at the time, right? This was a long time ago before I really understood very much about soy, where food comes from, et cetera. But we took him off of soy, and within a few days, the 10 months of him constantly being on steroids, antibiotics, inhalers, constantly missing work, missing my fellowship training. You can imagine how that was going. That was over. He stopped being sick. But of course, we then had to recover his body from all the medications that he'd been on. And so that really got me into what are the foundations of health? And this is true, of course, for children. And, I do adult and pediatric neurology. So I offered this, as health for children and for families. But it's, of course, true for everyone, being exposed to germs and microbes. And yes, I said being exposed to germs and microbes, feeding that microbiome, number 1. Number 2, eating fresh food from healthy soil. And number 3, getting outdoors into nature, connecting to nature. So those 3 things became the foundation of my book, The Dirt Cure. And that was really huge for a lot of people. And, I was able to recover my son, who is now 15 and a half years old. And as I was telling you before we started, taller than everyone else in the family, and just finished taking a homeschooling course in physiology. And he's chatting with me about physiology and, anatomy, and did a whole thing on that. And very passionate about chess. So he grew up and is growing up to be, a healthy, robust kid. He's someone who spots eagles and hawks wherever we go. It's like unbelievable. I used to think he was making it up, but then it would always bear out. We'd be like, oh my God, there is the eagle. He really, so I always think he's sort of like this little shaman kid. But then, how did this turn into terrain? Well, a few years later after that, so that was when he was about a year to a year and a half. So when he was 7 years old, we discovered, and probably this is why he was sick way back when he was a year, we discovered mold in our apartment. We had to do a whole gutting of the apartment. He was actually having breathing issues again. Suddenly we were like, what is this? And we had to move out, gutted a whole bunch of the apartment down to the studs, and it was a whole elaborate thing, got rid of all our upholstered furniture. It was a very, intense time. And we moved back in. Everything had been gutted. All the clothes had been cleaned. All the stuffed animals had been gotten rid of. I mean, all the things that you can imagine. And within 2 weeks of moving back in, he was taking a shower in the brand new bathroom, and he had a seizure. And he'd never had a seizure before. And he had a seizure right in that bathroom, which was like the epicenter of the mold, except there was no more mold. It had been tested, the whole thing. And it was, here I am, I'm holding him, and I'm thinking to myself, just what I knew with all my heart and soul was, this isn't just a physical thing. We've done everything. I know what to do. I was the pediatric neurologist, in fact, in the world, probably people would have sent my son to. And what I discovered was, in that moment, I said, I need to learn what's happening in his energy body, in his spiritual body, because this is something more than physical. And that took me on a journey to Ecuador. And it took me on a journey into learning with elders and shamans and, really growing my ideas and my understanding all the way back to who I was when I was playing in the creek as a child, to this idea of terrain and the idea that our health is not just about what we're doing in our physical bodies. It's actually based in the paradigm that everything is connected. And that was when I started the Terrain Institute to teach people about this. We're part of the natural world. The natural world is part of us. And we are physical, emotional, spiritual, creative, and in fact, ecological beings. And we have to be in good relations with ourselves, with those around us, and with the land that we stand on. And I would even say our ancestors in the invisible world, in order to truly be healthy.
That is such a beautiful explanation of the Terrain Institute. And I know this is ongoing, ever unfolding for you. You'll be the forever student. I know I'll be the forever student as well. But, really bringing it together when we talk about, epigenetics. So there's the constant internal communication, but we as a living organism are also constantly communicating with the external environment. And in, so many ways, it feels like, we've gotten separated from that. Mm-hmm. We have cut ourselves off from that. And it for, as a human being, it goes all the way back to, how we're born and how we come into the world, and how important it is to come into the world through the vaginal canal, near the anus of the mother, and for that baby to be skin to skin and open that little mouth and put their mouth on the nipple. And then all these microbes are being infused to activate not only the physical, but also the energetic imprint. Mm-hmm. Of what it means to be human. Yeah. And, I would love for our, our viewers, think back to, the circumstances of your own birth and how you were born. And did you come into the world through your mom's vagina? And were you breastfed? And then kind of go back and think about your allergies, think about your illnesses, think about, 30, 40, 50, 60 years later, what is happening here that, upstream of that started, way back when. And like you said, even going into what's happening on the ancestral level, the generational information, both the trauma and the triumph that gets passed on, and those energetic imprints. So I'm loving all of that. So we have Marianne saying everything is connected. Absolutely. Sharon is saying thank you for sharing, Dr. Maya. And Dr. Kathy, love this. The return to nature. We're all connected. Thank you for your words. So so extraordinarily important. And one of the most fascinating interviews that you have is your interview with Kieran Krishnan. And the whole concept where the two of you are talking about your microbial terrain, the science of community, so that inner community and how that connects with the outer community. Could you tell us, before we get into that, tell people a little bit about what the Terrain Summit is, and why did you start there? Why did you start talking about germs, Dr. Maya? That's what
Well, what really fascinates me is this idea of where do we end? Like, where does the me end and the we begin, right? Because what we know now, and this is what I learned really at the beginning of trying to heal my son way back when, is, we're actually only about 10% human material in our bodies, and we're mostly microbes. And these microbes are living in and on our body, 3 to 5 pounds of microbes, bacteria, viruses, fungi, even parasites that are invisible to us, but are actually very active members of our physiology. Their byproducts are our nutrients like B12 and like vitamin K. They're actually producing nutrients that are essential to us. They are communicating constantly with our immune system. They're communicating with our mitochondria. And what's amazing about that is the way that they communicate with our mitochondria. People may not know this, but mitochondria evolved from bacteria. And, this is really beautiful work done by Lynn Margulies way back when. And so the way that bacteria and mitochondria are in communication with each other all the time is a way that bacteria talk to one another, which is called quorum sensing. So there's this way in which the bacteria in and on our body are in constant communication with our mitochondria, which are, yes, the powerhouse of the cell. And I have a beautiful, beautiful interview with Dr. Robert Navio, who is a brilliant scientist, mitochondrial scientist. And he never does interviews, but he's a very dear friend of mine for a long time. So he agreed to do the interview for the summit. And we talk exactly about how the mitochondria is more than just even the energy maker or the powerhouse of the cell, how complex its relationship is. It's talking to the nuclei. It's and telling the nucleus what hormones to release, what neurotransmitters to release. All kinds of really powerful things are happening between the microbes in our body and our cells. And so, there's this idea that we're not just these individual beings, we're actually communities. We're actually, as Kieran says, we're like a rainforest, a walking rainforest. And that to me is just so profound. So this idea of terrain and of germs is, we don't want to avoid, and now, who would have thought that, this would become so relevant with the time that we're in with this pandemic. But in fact, there's a lot of conversation now of what's going to happen, especially to children. But I think this is actually totally true for adults too, as they're in this kind of masked, hand sanitized world, ever more so, where they're not connecting to community and to other people and even to nature as much as they might have been before, and what's going to happen to those developing immune systems. So I think this is really just as important as ever, because the thing that we really know about the immune system, and part of why these microbes are so important, is they allow our immune systems to practice and learn. It's like practicing the violin. When you have the big performance, if you didn't practice, or you paid someone else to come in and practice for you, or you slapped the person's hand away every time, they went to practice. What are they going to do once they get on stage and they have to do that big, concerto? They can't do it. They're going to flub up. So you really need practice. And that's part of what our experience with germs and microbes does for us.
Ah, yes, so beautifully said. And I hope people are kind of getting the picture. So one of the things that my husband and I did, an opportunity that came through the pandemic, is that, okay, so we're shut down. We created a beautiful garden in the backyard and just started planting things and growing things and digging in that dirt and making sure that we were outside, every day on most days, particularly, it started in March. So we were going into better and better weather, and we essentially spent most of the year outdoors and most of the year eating the wonderful food that we grew in our own garden. And again, on so many levels, mind, body, and spirit, this was so healing and dynamic and well connected. But what about, the adults that are watching and they're wondering, okay, well, how do I protect, and I love this word, the holobiome of me. That might be a new word to some people, but you and Dr. Kieran talk about that, the holobiome. What can people do right now? Because as we see, we got this vaccination thing going, and we're in a quite a pickle here. What might be a pathway toward holism and toward healing?
Well, I think, and I don't want to romanticize nature in the sense that, nothing is without its challenges, right? But, the kinds of things that nurture and nourish our microbiome are diversity, actually. Things that are, being exposed to diverse foods, diverse organisms, having diverse kinds of experiences. And this could include just eating different colors and different kinds of like fruits and vegetables, because diverse foods beget diverse microbes. And what we want, I always talk, what is our magic bullet? Because we always thought it was going to be, we're going to find that gene that tells us everything, that we're going to find that one drug that's going to, no, it turns out the magic bullet is diversity. And how, beautiful and relevant is that in these times when people are, I hope, finally even thinking about what everybody's contributing, how important it is that we're all here honoring everybody and everybody's voice and everybody's contribution. And that is true, right? As above, so below, as within, so without. Within our own bodies, we need to have incredibly diverse organisms doing, playing a lot of different kinds of roles. So food diversity absolutely is important. Being out in nature, soil is the most diverse probiotic you can find, right? So we're all eating things, we're getting the probiotics off the shelves, and go out and you have 1 teaspoon of soil that you're, and I too am digging my hands and planting things. And that's what I did through the pandemic. I had the biggest garden I've ever had. I got 12 new chickens, we built a whole new chicken coop. So we have a double chicken coop, I'm getting microbes from my pets, from my chickens, from my dog. We share a microbiome. Thinking about actually, a communal microbiome is really important. So it's community with nature, it's community with animals, it's community with your food, and ideally it's community with other people, even if it's just your pod. But we know that when we're in a group in person together with other people, we actually expand our microbiome significantly. So it's really actually thinking about how not to use too much hand sanitizer, how not to use too much bleach, how to make sure that you're really sometimes finding that way to be outside, pulling that mask down a little bit so you're breathing in the microbes if you're in nature especially. I run in the woods and I walk in the woods almost every day. And I see a lot of people wearing a mask the entire time. Even when I only pass one person, it's empty there. So if you have that possibility of being alone in a nature place, pull that down and breathe in the microbes. We want to have those exposures in a way that feels okay and comfortable.
I love all of that. And I also love, the metaphor of diversity is good for us.
Mm-hmm.
So folks, I want you to hear that. So that means not only the internal diversity, that means, not only the exposure within our pods, but literally the diversity that's available in humankind. This is how we are built. This is, mind, body, and spirit. We're meant to have that reflected within, and it's also meant to be reflected without. And I think, what we're seeing in the world, or certainly in this country, is this infectoid of hatred, which is absolutely insane. We're literally going to kill ourselves psychologically and spiritually if we don't learn how to turn this around, if we don't learn how to see the oneness and recognize the oneness. And I love how you're bringing it right down to the eukaryotic cell, the mitochondria, and through the Terrain Summit, help people to see and understand these relationships. And tell us a little bit, please, about the Terrain Summit and the opportunity there. And I know, we're going to be dropping in the chat how people can find out more about that, how they can participate, and how they can learn. I'm telling you, this is so exciting. It's different. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, I love that you said it's different because, there's a lot of summits out there. And the reason I never like to do anything that I think other people are already doing. Like, I don't want to just, I don't want to just do things to do it. I really want to bring something new and a new perspective and a new paradigm. And so what the Terrain Summit for me is my baby, because I wanted to bring this paradigm where it's not like, here are all the answers, like you have to do this list of things, but really to understand there's a lot of ways in. There's a lot of reasons that we might feel sick, or we might be more prone to not being in our most optimal function, and that's physically, emotionally, spiritually. And there's a lot of ways into that. So I wanted to really have people who could talk about our physical bodies and, the food that we eat and our microbiome and, our mitochondria, but also really practical things like blood sugar, like, really like some of the basics, toxins, all that kind of stuff. But then I also wanted to have people who could talk about our emotional health. So I have, Jennifer Mullen, who calls herself, she's on Instagram as Decolonizing Therapy. She's a therapist, and she's talking about the terrain of rage. If one of the things I believe is that things like grief, we have Dr. Claudia Ford talking about grief, to be talking about trauma, to be talking about rage, to be talking about grief. I don't believe that there's any emotion that's shameful or that's bad or that's wrong. And what I believe is that until we identify these kinds of emotions within ourselves that we all have, and help move them, learn ways to work with them and to talk about them, those are going to be things we're holding in our body. We all experience different kinds of trauma in our lives. And we know, for example, about things like adverse childhood events, ACEs, you might have seen, that we actually physically hold within our bodies. If you have a family member who's incarcerated or has addiction, or your parents, there was violence or abuse or divorce, the things that a lot of us go through, in our lives, many of us go through, those things change our nervous systems, change our connective tissue. We hold those things in our cells, and there's a lot of data about this, published data. And so I wanted to have ways that we could be talking about this, because it is affecting our physical body. It is affecting our mental health. And then I wanted to have people who were going to be able to talk about creativity in our health, right? Like Dr. Carol Penn, who is one of our wonderful speakers and gave just a most glorious interview, and talking about, I had someone, also but Aisha Ophelia, who talks about the Girlfriend Manifesto, and she was talking about making bad art. And that has been a practice that I've taken on ever since that interview, where I'm painting and just doing, not for anybody else to see, but just like connecting with my creative, receptive side, right? Which a lot of us aren't doing. We're all in this like, go, 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 what am I producing mode? So I really wanted to create this idea of, we're looking at our creative terrain, we're looking at our spiritual terrain, where we have a shaman who's talking about the invisible world and how we're connecting with the invisible world as well. So I really wanted it to be something expansive, where there was something for everyone, and really a way to think about our health as, again, that indigenous way of thinking, that physical health is downstream to our spiritual and our emotional health, and that if we're not talking about the spiritual world as well, that we're really not going to totally understand what's going on in our physical bodies and in the physical world.
I couldn't agree more. And I love, rage, the emotional terrain, and ancestral healing. This is part of the work that Dr. Kathy Farrar and I are doing when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and, unpacking racism and looking at generational trauma and racialized trauma as well. And, again, Dr. Mullen's interview, and I love, she's here in Jersey with me. She talks about unpacking her own rage, and that she helps other people unpack and explore theirs. And so you're really looking at it through the sacred lens or the ancestral lens, so same thing, with our viewers. When you think about, again, how you're manifesting now, and you think about all the areas of your life, and do you truly feel healthy? Do you truly feel balanced? Have you explored that emotional territory? I was raised with the idea children are to be seen, not heard, and that it was not very polite for a woman to express, a woman to express her rage or her anger. Mm-hmm. And I know it took me a long time to learn how to live with my anger, to live with my rage. I would literally break out in hives if I was in the presence of someone else's rage, a strong, not even necessarily directed at me, but two people having a strong argument. And because, I was taught to stuff it, don't go there. And that became a real, visible, physiological response. There I would be, hives, head to foot. Because I'm allergic to your anger, let alone not able to even metabolize my own. Again, raised with that strong cultural edict. And, I've been learning over the last 10 years, especially, all emotion is innocent, and it all has a place, and it can all be our teacher. And again, I think in some ways that's why I became a dancer, because I learned at a very early age that what I was not allowed to express verbally, I could express through my movement. I could express through performance. I could express through my creativity. And none of the adults in my life seemed to censor that at all. So, right. That's where I would go. That would always be my go-to. And I always say that for me, when I'm moving, that's not so much when I'm talking to God, but that's when God is talking to me. My messages are kinesthetic. They come through the impression of movement. So I love that. I also have to welcome my dear sister friend, Jana Long, to the show. She is just one of the globe's most amazing yoga instructors. And, she really understands how important movement is to literally, and you use that term, be able to move through our emotions so that it doesn't get hardwired into our nervous system. And I think that's one of the things that's different in my approach. When you work with me, you're also going to move with me as well. Now, another area that you go into is the terrain of art and visual healing. How does the terrain of art and visual healing impact the microbiome of us? What does that have? What does art have to do with healing?
Well, I feel like I should be asking you that question right now, but but I did, and you can listen to her interview to hear the answer to that question. I asked Louis Schwartzberg to come and do an interview. Louis Schwartzberg, for those who don't know, is actually one of the foremost, what is it called? Like I can't think of the word actually, but he does the most beautiful nature filming that is very like it's like frame by frame, so you can see like the blooming of the flower. You can see, he slows things down or speeds things up in such a way that you can really experience the awe of processes in nature that you would normally not be able to appreciate because of the way that time works, right? So he plays with time and what we're able to explore. And he made the movie Fantastic Fungi, for those of you who don't know, which is a mind-blowing movie. And anyone who follows me on social media knows that I am a huge forager of mushrooms. I love finding all different kinds of mushrooms and photographing them and cooking them and making medicine from them. So anyway, Fantastic Fungi is an amazing film as a side point. But he does this beautiful work where he brought these films into hospitals, where in each hospital room, a person can choose to go on a journey, to the bottom of the ocean, to, a beautiful place in a foreign land. And basically, they can choose this journey. And what they are doing is studying what this does for people's recovery, what this does for their physical and their mental and their emotional health. And of course, not surprisingly, it's profound. And we know, and this is something I've actually, even all the way back when I was presenting for the Mind, Body, Mind, Mood, and Food, and, all of the food as medicine conferences, I would always show, how just if you're looking out the window at trees in the hospital, your healing goes faster. You are discharged more quickly. You need less pain medication. We're literally being supported by nature just by seeing it. And here he's bringing this very rich visual experience, and they're experimenting with scents, adding actually, different kinds of fragrances to it and music. And so really making these experiential healing events, that someone can choose in their hospital room. So very profound to think about. We think a lot about food as medicine, but we don't think about what we're feeding ourselves through our eyes and our ears. So that I thought was a very profound way of thinking about our terrain, because, what we have a lot of agency. I think right now there's a lot of sense of, things are happening to us and we can't control things. And it's true to some degree that we can't, but there are things we can control. And I'm always interested in, where do we have agency? Where do we have the possibility of sovereignty? And, how can we create these beautiful safe spaces within ourselves, and also these beautiful spaces, these diverse spaces around us? And so for me, what was very important and potent about this summit is to have lots of different kinds of voices. We actually have Jackie Summers, who's talking about, he was the first Black person in the United States to have a liquor license. He started an amazing company, Sorel, which was bringing his own culture to make a very unique product. And he talks about his journey as an entrepreneur, dealing with the issue of racism and inequity. And so, and it's a really beautiful conversation that I don't think a lot of us are having, to weave that in to, as you said, Carol, that idea of diversity around us as well as within us, and really hearing a lot of different voices and a lot of different people's healing journeys, and and the gifts that they have taken away from those.
Oh, beautiful. So, one of the things that I look at in my own practice is food as medicine, meditation as medicine, movement as medicine, and art and beauty as medicine. And again, if people could, that peripheral vision expand it a little bit more, we do have agency over much more than we think we do. So we have Jana is saying, I love everything that's been shared. This is such a rich dialogue. And then we have here from Martha. This is exciting because I carry an EpiPen. I have issues with gluten, lactose, latex, different allergies. I have a complex health history and diagnosis. I live in constant fear, even in the hospital and rehab places. No one believes my fear and difficulties. And I think she's speaking of something that's pretty common, that when we go into established medical places, oftentimes we feel that we're not being heard. No one is listening to us. How do people get heard when, they know the truth of themselves is that, their microbiome is struggling with the external biome, and these, these are real threats. These are threats when, people who are in danger of these anaphylactic reactions.
I think, and as I said at the very beginning of this conversation, I went through this same thing with my son. Which is I went to, this top doctor, and here I was a doctor, and actually his dad, my son's dad, also is a doctor and was a doctor in that institution. And I was still kind of, got patted on the head. Oh, you're just a hysterical mom, and I think that it's really interesting. First of all, there's a lot of misogyny in the medical system. That's for sure. It's still a very patriarchal system. It took a lot of advocating, and also just being willing to be really persistent. But it's, of course, exhausting to have to do that when you really want to be healing and need to be healing. It just happened, in fact, the other day that sometimes people are sitting in my office, and I bet this has happened with you too, Dr. Carol, is that people sitting in the office, I tell people all the time, like, you're an expert in yourself, or you're an expert in your child. I'm an expert in a lot of people, but you're the expert in yourself. And the only way that we're going to be able to move forward and really heal you is if we're partnering, right? Not me just telling people what to do, but us listening to one another and partnering together. And I always tell people to follow that, intuition. And I think just more and more of us have to be able to say that to patients and really teach people about that partnering. It's I think the way that we come to any success in medicine is to feel empowered also, right? And to feel heard. I think we really minimize and underestimate the power of being validated. That is a healing in and of itself, just being validated. And, that's part of what I actually, part of that witnessing that happens, what I create in my classes in the Terrain Institute is just that we can witness each other. Sometimes you don't even need all the fixing. It's just the witnessing and being validated for what you yourself are feeling. Being believed can be profound.
Yeah, that in and of itself can be a profound healing. To be witnessed. Oftentimes when I'm working with a group and someone is moving through powerful emotions, they're doing the ugly cry, it's not running out of their nose. I say this at the beginning, don't hand that person a tissue. It's okay. It's just a little mucus. This might be the first time or the only time or where they feel that they can get that thing out. And oftentimes, that's more about the person handing the tissue than it is about the person. It brings up a discomfort in you. And it becomes very, disruptive. And tells the person, oh, tuck that back in, tuck that back in. But a lot of times to have that witness, to have that vulnerability witness, to have the power of whatever is moving through the person at that time. And when the person gets on the other side of that, suddenly you see a brightness to them, a light that comes back into their eyes that says, I'm alive, I'm whole and complete in this moment. And it's so powerful to witness that, to see that, and to share that with the intimacy of sharing that with another human being. I always love that. So Marianne is saying, awesome tidbit, looking at trees when hospitalized can improve healing. And yeah, there are studies about that. In my home office, every window that I look out upon, I see trees. And I've always insisted on that. I would choose my apartments in the various places that I've lived around the United States by the view from my bedroom window. If I wasn't looking out on a tree, probably wasn't going to take that apartment. That was always important for me. And again, I knew that was good somehow before I could, had words to it. I knew that was good medicine for me. And perhaps it goes back to when I was a little girl, my bedroom window looked out on a tree. And I'm also like you, the only child of my mom, felt safe in that, felt safe looking out on these branches, and felt safe knowing that, there was a yard that I got to run around in. And, I used to love digging up dirt worms. That was,
Yes.
one of my favorite things to do. And we do have a question that I want to get to, and it's from Patricia. She says, why do allergies run in cycles, like 7-year cycles?
Well, I'm not that familiar with that idea, but what I will say is that in Chinese medicine, actually, they talk about 7-year cycles in the tradition of Chinese medicine, which is, obviously many, many, many thousands of years old, that every 7 years you're in a new cycle. So I think, our bodies do shift and our bodies change. And that's like a really important thing to me too. And part of why I wanted to kind of make this Terrain Summit be something that really touched a lot of places and gave people a really broad idea of how to interact with the material and with themselves, is because what we need at one time in our lives may not be what we need 7 years later, or 7 years later, or 7 years later, right? That we are shifting, we are changing. And while things can repeat, cycles can repeat, we're never in the same exact place that we were, the time before. So if you have a new health flare, for example, or you're coming back to the same allergies and you're like, hey, why is this happening in my body? I feel like I already dealt with this 7 years ago. Or, it's about really like, well, what does my body need right now? What does my body, mind, and spirit need right now? And what's the next kind of step for me? What's the next adventure for me? What are the next things I need to learn or give myself? And for me, I really had that experience, in fact, with my son, who at a year was sick with the asthma and all of those things. And then actually it was about 6 years, but almost 7 years later, if we think of kind of a broader definition of, when the symptoms started, it was about 7 years later or so. That he got this new breathing thing, right? And that was right around the time we moved out. And then he had the seizure, was about 7 years later. And, it was really, I think, for us to understand what the next frontier was. Now, what do I need to do? Because, of course, I felt so discouraged at that time. I thought, God, I did all these things. I'm doing the food. He's getting out into nature. I'm nourishing him in this way and this way. And, I felt so like really questioning of myself. And then I thought, no, there's more to know. There's more to learn. There's more that his body needs, his body, mind, and spirit need. And so, I think it's really about interacting with what our bodies and our minds and our spirits need at each phase. When things come up for us again and again, it's also sometimes a sign that there's something a little karmic. This is my, perspective, is that there are these karmic things that can come up for us. And I talk a lot in the Terrain Institute for my students about how do we burn karma, is by really not getting sort of, letting ourselves fall into the same grooves again, but learning how to take that moment and say, hey, I'm seeing this repeating for me. What might I need to learn right now? How can I interact with this challenge differently than I have in the past? And maybe sometimes those things will then resolve and they won't come back again. That can happen sometimes.
Absolutely. So, as always, the hour flies by. So what I want everybody to know is that I'm going to send out on my email list an invitation for people to join the Terrain Summit. It starts tomorrow and it goes through March 28th. My interview airs on March 28th, so I'm really excited, looking forward to that. That's the last day of the summit. There's lots of downloads and goodies as soon as you join, because I know people are going to want to journey with you during this week. I know they're going to want to hear these speakers. I know they're going to want to understand the terrain of themselves better. Hey, this is, the first weekend in spring. Spring is starting this weekend. And so it's time for spring cleaning. It's time for renewal. It is time for us to understand the terrain of ourselves. So this is, everybody, look, this is y'all's homework. I give y'all homework to step into this year. Step into this as we're learning more and more and more about COVID-19 and this virus. Learn about your intimate, intrinsic, literally, your life depends upon it, relationship between you and the world around us, both seen and unseen. And that includes all these little probes, with the 3 to 5 pounds that we carry of microbes in and around us as humans. So I'm just so grateful that you shared all your pearls of wisdom, that you introduced us to all these new terms and new people in ways that people might not have been thinking about their health before. Stretching out the definitions of health, what it means to optimize health and wellness. So we're grateful. We're excited for all of that. And we're really excited for the Terrain Summit and the journey we're going to go on this week with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your beautiful interview. I can't wait for people here to get to be a part of that interview because it was so beautiful. And I'm sure people here know you so intimately, but it was just so beautiful to hear your story and your perspective. So I'm excited for us to go on this journey together.
Yes, I am too. So fantastic discussion and gifts for all of us to embrace. Thank you. Yes, great information. Thank you, doctors, as always. So tune in tomorrow, this week, Monday through Thursday, 8 a.m. meditation and a time of madness, the morning show. You'll be hearing more and more about the Terrain Summit on each day this week. So really exciting week. And next Sunday, we're going to be having an exciting interview with my super friend, Dr. Michael Friedman, founder of the Association for the Advancement of Restorative Medicine. So I am so excited. Have a great week, everyone. We're going to sign off. Yes, Marianne, thank you. Yes, Sharon, thank you. Hey, Karen, welcome, and thank you so much. All right, till tomorrow morning.